It was the kind of winter night the mountains never forget. A lonely police officer living at the edge of a frozen forest believed the storm would pass without changing anything. Then a trembling German Shepherd puppy appeared on his porch covered in snow and fear. The puppy did not ask for food, did not ask for warmth. It only turned and ran into the darkness and looked back as if saying, "Please come with me." What that officer found in the abandoned playground would change 3 lives forever. This is not just a rescue story. It is a story about courage, faith, and the quiet miracles that happen when someone chooses not to walk away. Before we begin, tell me where you are watching from today. Leave your city or country in the comments and let us walk this story together. Coldmore Ridge was the kind of mountain town winter tried to erase. Snow had been falling for 3 days without mercy, burying the narrow roads, the rooftops, the pine fences, even the memory of color. Street lamps glowed like distant stars trapped inside glass, their light swallowed by drifting white. The wind moved through the valley with a voice of its own, not loud, not angry, just steady and ancient, as if the mountains were breathing through it. At the edge of that town, beyond the last plowed road and the last house that still showed smoke from a chimney, stood a solitary cabin pressed against the forest. That cabin belonged to Officer Rowan Hale. Rowan was 44, a man built from restraint and weather, tall without being imposing, broad-shouldered but lean from years of disciplined living. His hair was kept short, dark with thin streaks of gray at the temples, a habit he had never broken after the force. His face carried hard angles, softened only by a trimmed beard that never fully hid the scar, cutting faintly along his jaw, a souvenir from a night patrol years before. His eyes were pale gray, almost colorless in certain light, the kind that did not rush to judgment and never wasted motion. People in town once said he looked like someone who had learned the cost of mistakes early and never forgotten the price. The past year had left him suspended between uniforms, officially on temporary leave, after refusing an internal order he believed would have cost an innocent life. That choice had not made him popular with certain men in the department. It had made him quiet. The cabin was his refuge, not from people but from noise. He trusted the forest. The forest did not lie. On that night, Rowan had just set another log into the hearth. The fire answered with a soft crackle. Outside, the storm kept walking. The kettle on the stove had begun to whisper when a sound slid through the wind. Not a knock, not quite a scratch. Something uneven. Something tired. Rowan stood still. He had learned long ago that the world rarely announced danger loudly. He crossed the room and opened the door. The cold rushed in like a living thing. On the top step, half buried in snow, stood a German Shepherd puppy, no more than 5 months old, small for the breed, thin to the point of fragility. Its coat was the classic black and tan, but the colors were dulled by wet, by ice, by fear. One ear tried to stand and failed, folding in on itself. The other drooped. Snow clung to its whiskers. Its ribs were visible when it breathed. A shallow scrape marked one back leg, already crusted with blood and ice. The puppy did not bark. It did not whine. It simply looked up at him. The eyes were too large for its face, dark, glassy, and full of something that was not confusion, not hunger, but intention. The kind of look Rowan had seen once in a trapped climber and once in a child pulled from floodwater. It was the look that said, "I cannot do this alone." The puppy turned, took 3 hesitant steps into the snow, then stopped and looked back. Its tail stayed low, trembling. Rowan did not speak. He did not need to. He pulled on his coat, heavy wool, the one with the torn pocket he never fixed, stepped into his boots without bothering with the laces, and reached for the flashlight by the door. When he stepped onto the porch, the puppy waited long enough to be sure he followed, then began to move. They walked into the storm. Snow filled the space between the trees, softening the world, erasing distance. The forest swallowed the cabin behind them. The puppy moved carefully, favoring its back leg, but its pace carried urgency. Every few steps it stopped and turned, as if checking that the man was still there. Rowan kept the beam of the flashlight low, letting the snow fall through the light like slow stars. His breath came steady. His mind, for once, was quiet. The trail they followed was not a trail, only the suggestion of one, where the snow lay thinner between the pines. Coldmoor Ridge had been a mining town once, then a logging town, then neither. What remained were roads that went nowhere and places the world had forgotten. As they moved deeper, Rowan noticed the puppy's exhaustion. The animal was running on something thinner than strength. It was running on purpose. After nearly 15 minutes, the trees began to thin. Shapes appeared through the snow. Broken fence posts, a rusted bench half buried, the outline of a swing set. The abandoned playground of Iron Vale, a place no one used anymore after the mill closed and families drifted away. The single street lamp at the far edge flickered weakly, painting the snow in sick yellow. The puppy's pace quickened. Rowan heard voices before he saw anyone. Laughter, young, careless. The sound carried no fear of consequence. The puppy made a broken sound in its throat and bolted. Rowan followed, boots sliding once before finding grip. As they broke into the light, the shapes sharpened. Two figures stood beneath the lamp, both male. Both tall, both far too comfortable. One was blonde, clean-cut, expensive jacket, phone raised, filming. The other broader, dark-haired, hands in his pockets, leaning as if the world were something he had already won. And beneath the lamp, something darker. A larger shape, upright against the pole. The beam of Rowan's flashlight caught fur, black and tan. A full-grown German shepherd, female, bound upright with thick rope looped around her chest and neck. Her body shook violently. Her hind legs scraped against the frozen ground, barely holding her weight. One ear was torn, one eye swollen shut. The other, amber and wide, rolled with terror and awareness. Blood streaked through her coat, dark against the snow. The puppy cried out and tried to run to her. The sound of it split the air. The blond boy laughed. The sound was wrong in that place. Rowan felt something open in his chest that had been sealed for years. He stepped forward. The world narrowed. He said nothing. He did not have to. The boys noticed him then. The blonde lowered his phone slightly. Surprise flickered, then irritation. He opened his mouth. Rowan moved. The distance between them vanished. His hand closed around the boy's wrist, twisted, drove him face first into the snow. The phone flew from the boy's hand and skidded across the ice, still glowing. The second boy lurched forward, then stopped when Rowan turned his head. Rowan's face held no anger, only focus. "Back," he said. "Quiet." The word carried weight. The boy stepped away. Rowan moved to the dog. He crouched, letting her scent his hand. For a moment she bared her teeth, not in threat, but in reflex. Then her strength failed and she whimpered. He cut the rope with the knife he always carried. The fibers snapped. Her body collapsed. Rowan caught her, easing her down, shielding her head from the frozen ground. She trembled violently, chest heaving. But she was alive. The puppy pressed against her side, crying softly, refusing to leave. Rowan looked up once. The blond boy had scrambled to his feet, his face red with humiliation and cold. He spat something into the snow. Rowan stood. Rain and snow slid down his coat. His eyes were pale and unblinking. "If I ever see either of you near this dog again," he said, his voice calm enough to be terrifying, "no one will be coming to help you." The words were not a threat. They were a promise made by a man who understood consequences. The boys hesitated. Then they ran, slipping once before disappearing into the trees. The forest closed behind them. Silence returned, thick and absolute. Rowan knelt beside the dogs. He tore the lining from his coat and pressed it against the worst of the bleeding. The mother dog's remaining eye followed him. Intelligence was there, pain, trust that had been bruised but not destroyed. "You held on," he murmured. "That matters." He lifted her carefully, adjusting his grip so the rope burns would not tear further. She was heavy, but he had carried heavier things from worse places. The puppy limped close, refusing to be left behind. Rowan turned back toward the forest path. Snow swallowed their footprints as they went. The storm kept falling. The snow followed them all the way back to the cabin, as if the mountain itself were unwilling to let the night close without witness. Rowan Hale moved through the trees with careful speed, the German shepherd mother's weight steady in his arms, her breath warm against the side of his neck, each exhale shallow but stubborn. The puppy, limping yet unyielding, followed at his heel, slipping sometimes in the snow and scrambling back to its feet with a determination too large for its small body. The forest did not question them. The wind softened. The storm's voice lowered, as though even the cold had chosen to listen. When Rowan reached the edge of the clearing and his cabin came into view, its single window glowing faintly with firelight, the mother dog stirred, her remaining eye opening wider, tracking the shape of the shelter ahead. He felt the tremor of her body ease just a little. He carried her inside, kicked the door closed with his heel, and laid her carefully on the thick wool blanket he kept by the hearth. The fire's warmth wrapped around them at once, steam rising from her soaked coat, the smell of iron and wet fur filling the room. The puppy stood at the edge of the blanket, shivering, eyes locked on its mother, afraid to step closer, afraid to step away. Rowan knelt and reached for it slowly, palm open. The puppy hesitated, then leaned forward and allowed him to lift its injured leg. The scrape along the back paw was ugly but shallow, the skin torn raw by ice and stone. Rowan cleaned it with warm water from the kettle, the puppy trembling but silent, then wrapped it in a strip torn from an old flannel shirt. When he set the puppy down beside the fire, it curled instinctively against the mother dog's chest. Rowan turned his attention back to the mother. The rope burns around her neck and chest were worse than he had thought. The flesh was torn and swollen, the fur stiff with blood. One ear was shredded along the edge, and her breathing rattled deep in her chest, a sound that did not belong in any living creature. He cleaned what he could, pressed fresh cloth against the worst of the wounds, and whispered to her as he worked, not because he believed dogs understood words the way people did, but because no living thing deserved to suffer in silence. "I'm here," he said quietly. "You're not alone now." The mother dog's eye followed his face, unblinking, amber, and fierce even through pain. She did not bare her teeth again. She did not growl. She simply watched him, the way soldiers watched medics in the field, the way the wounded always watched the one who held their life in his hands. By the time the bleeding slowed and her breathing steadied into something that resembled rest, the storm outside had begun to thin. Snow still fell, but not with the same violence. Rowan sat back on his heels, exhaustion settling into his bones. He had not realized how tightly he had been holding himself together until the work was done. The puppy, its small body finally warming, shifted closer to its mother and let out a soft sound in its sleep, half sigh, half prayer. Rowan stood and moved to the window. Beyond the glass, the forest was still, the clearing erased in white. The world looked clean in the way only winter could make it look clean, hiding every wound beneath silence. He should have called it in. He knew that. He was a police officer, even on leave, and the scene at Ironvale was a crime. But he also knew the names of the boys he had seen under that lamp. He had recognized them before they ran. Caleb Drayton, 17, son of a property developer who had poured money into half the town. Lucas Whitmore, nearly 18, nephew of a county commissioner. He knew how the stories went when those families were involved. He had watched them play out too many times. Still, he did not intend to stay quiet. The night passed without further sound. Rowan did not sleep. He sat at the table with his coffee growing cold, listening to the fire and the slow, stubborn breathing of the injured dog. When morning came, thin and gray, the forest around the cabin steamed as the storm's last breath faded. Rowan stepped outside to fetch more wood and stopped. The front door hung crooked on its hinges. Deep gouges scarred the cabin wall, fresh, angry, cut by something heavier than a fist. One window had been shattered, glass scattered across the snow like broken ice. Tire tracks carved the ground near the porch, wide and deliberate, the kind left by a truck that wanted to be seen. Rowan stood very still. The mountain air bit at his lungs. He did not swear. He did not rush. He simply looked, and in that long moment he understood that the night at Ironvale had not ended under the street lamp. Inside, the mother dog lifted her head when he returned, a low, warning rumble vibrating in her chest despite the pain. The puppy rose unsteadily and pressed against his leg. "It's all right," Rowan murmured, though he was no longer certain it was. By noon, a sheriff's cruiser crawled up the gravel road. The deputy who stepped out was Mark Bell, early 30s, thick-necked, uniform too clean, mustache trimmed with a precision that suggested more time in mirrors than on patrol. He surveyed the damage with mild interest before his eyes moved to the dogs. "Got a call," Bell said. "Report says you assaulted 2 minors last night." Rowan leaned against the porch railing, arms folded. "I stopped them from killing a dog." Bell's mouth tightened. He asked his questions carefully. Why was Rowan out there? Why did he live alone? Why was he carrying a knife? Rowan answered plainly. Bell wrote slowly, nodding without agreement. When he left, he offered no help, no promise of follow-up. Only, "Might be best if you keep to yourself." By evening, the town had already chosen its story. At the feed store miles down the road, voices dropped when Rowan entered. Someone muttered, "Dangerous." Another said, "Crazy." The words followed him back into the snow. That night, as Rowan refilled the water bowl near the hearth, the puppy sniffed, then backed away, whining softly. The mother's head snapped up, the warning growl deepening. Rowan smelled it then, sharp and bitter. He tipped the bowl out and saw the water darken the dirt. A few steps from the door, half hidden beneath snow, lay a piece of sausage dusted with pale grains. Poison. Rowan burned it all in the fire pit behind the cabin. The smoke rose straight into the cold sky. They were not finished. Rowan worked through the night. He checked the old trail cameras he had installed years before to watch the wildlife. One showed headlights idling near his drive just before dawn. Another caught a truck circling Ironvale long after he had left. He copied the footage, labeled the times, photographed the tracks and the shattered window, everything neat, everything precise. Panic, he knew, was expensive. The mother dog watched him from the blanket, her single eye following each step. The puppy, braver now, pressed closer, its tail giving a tentative wag, before remembering fear. "They don't scare easy," Rowan said softly. "Neither do you." By the end of the week, the evidence lay in careful stacks on his table. He did not take it to the local sheriff. Instead, he called a regional animal welfare office 2 counties away. A woman answered, her voice calm, steady. Her name was Eleanor Briggs, late 50s, years of hard work shaping both her posture and her patience. Rowan gave her only facts. She listened. When the call ended, the forest outside was quiet again. But the silence felt different. Something was waiting. The mountain kept its silence, but the town did not. By the 3rd morning after the storm, Coldmore Ridge had found its story, and it was not kind to Rowan Hale. The feed store owner, Martha Klein, a narrow woman in her early 60s with sharp cheekbones and a voice that had once been louder before grief took her husband to the mines, stopped speaking when Rowan entered. She nodded stiffly, then turned her back as if he were a stranger who had brought winter with him. 2 men near the grain sacks whispered, their words dissolving when he looked their way. In the parking lot, a teenager he did not recognize raised a phone, snapped a picture, and ran. Rowan felt none of it on his face. But something in his chest began to settle into a familiar, unwelcome shape. He had worn that weight before in other places, other years, when the truth was inconvenient and men chose easier lies. At the cabin, Astra lay on the blanket by the hearth, her wounds improving but her strength still uncertain. Her breathing no longer rattled, but every movement cost her something. Lumen, the puppy, had begun to shadow Rowan wherever he went, clumsy paws slipping on the wood floor, ears rising and falling like uncertain flags. The puppy's coat had thickened slightly, the black deepening, the tan brightening at the edges of his face and legs, but the world still frightened him. Only Rowan did not. Rowan cleaned Astra's wounds each morning with quiet care. She endured it without protest, amber eye never leaving his face. When he finished, she would release a breath that sounded too much like relief for a creature that had nearly been erased. Outside, the pressure grew. A truck idled at the edge of the clearing one afternoon, its windows dark. When Rowan stepped out, it pulled away without sound. Another night, stones struck the side of the cabin, not enough to break anything, only enough to announce presence. Lumen barked for the first time then, a small, broken sound of fury that surprised even him. Astra rose with effort and placed herself between the noise and the door, her injured body still willing to become a shield. "You don't have to," Rowan murmured, resting a hand between her shoulders. "Not anymore." But she stayed there. 3 days later, Eleanor Briggs arrived. Her state vehicle appeared on the narrow road like a small defiance against the town's will. Eleanor stepped out slowly, late 50s, iron gray hair pulled into a loose knot, boots practical, eyes the color of weathered denim. Her face carried the lines of someone who had learned patience not from comfort, but from consequence. She introduced herself simply and knelt to examine Astra, her hands careful, practiced, her voice soft. She inspected the rope burns, the torn ear, the fading bruises. "This was done on purpose," Eleanor said. Not a question. Rowan handed her the evidence, the footage, the photos, the poison, the tire tracks. She reviewed it all without interruption. "This isn't the first time," Eleanor said finally. "I recognize those boys." Within 48 hours, the story left Coldmoor Ridge. A regional station ran the footage. The phone video from Ironvale surfaced online, then another video from years earlier. Two younger boys, same laughter, same cruelty, cornering a stray cat behind a grocery store. The town's silence broke. Caleb Drayton's father hired a lawyer. Lucas Whitmore's uncle issued a statement. Both said their boys were misunderstood, that Rowan Hale was unstable, that the media was sensationalizing. But the timing had shifted. Too many eyes were watching. A formal meeting was called at the county office. Rowan attended at Eleanor's request. He wore a clean jacket, boots brushed of snow, beard trimmed closer than usual. He did not look dangerous. He looked tired. The boys were there with their families. The fathers were broad men in pressed shirts, faces set in practiced confidence. The mothers sat rigid, hands clenched. When Rowan spoke, he did not accuse. He described the rope, the blood, the weight of Astra's body when it collapsed. He did not raise his voice. Silence followed. By the end of the week, charges were filed. Not loud ones. Not the kind that fed anger, but enough to mark records that money could no longer erase. The retaliation stopped. No more trucks at the edge of the clearing, no more poison in the snow. That night, Rowan sat at the table, exhaustion finally finding him. Lumen lay at his feet, asleep, paws twitching in dreams. Astra rested near the door, her body still guarding, but her breathing steady. For the first time since the storm, the quiet felt earned. Winter did not leave Coldmoor Ridge all at once. It loosened its grip slowly, the way a hand releases something it has held too long. The mountains kept their snow, but the valley began to breathe again. Meltwater traced thin silver lines along the road, and the forest shifted from gray to the first uncertain hints of green. It was in this in-between season that Rowan Hale finally allowed himself to believe the danger had passed. Astra's strength returned in quiet increments. Each morning she rose a little easier. Each night she lay closer to the hearth, her breathing steady, the scars along her neck fading from angry red to muted pink. The torn edge of her ear dried and curled, a permanent mark of what she had survived. Yet there was nothing broken in the way she carried herself. Pain had not diminished her. It had sharpened her. Lumen changed faster. Growth came in awkward bursts. His paws were suddenly too large for his body, his ears trying to decide which direction they belonged. He followed Rowan everywhere, tripping over the edge of rugs, colliding with furniture, skidding across the wooden floor in sudden explosions of energy. But when Rowan paused, Lumen always returned, sitting at his boots, eyes lifted as if waiting for instruction he had not yet learned to name. The cabin itself changed. Where once there had been only the crackle of fire and the creak of cooling wood, there was now the soft percussion of paws on floorboards, the occasional low rumble of Astra's watchful breathing, the heavy, dream-filled sleep of Lumen near the hearth. Rowan still woke before dawn. Habit did not fade easily. He would step outside with his coffee, the steam rising into the cold, and stand listening to the forest. But the silence was different now. It no longer pressed against him. It moved with him. One morning, near the end of March, he found Eleanor Briggs waiting on the porch. She stood with her hands in her coat pockets, iron-gray hair loose from its knot, the wind tugging at the strands. Her state vehicle was parked just beyond the clearing, dusted with the last of the melting snow. "They're gone," Eleanor said simply. Rowan knew who she meant. Caleb Drayton and Lucas Whitmore had been sent away quietly. Their families had retreated behind lawyers and locked gates, their influence diminished by scrutiny. The case would not make national headlines, but it had left scars in the county record that would not fade. "Good," Rowan said. Eleanor looked past him into the cabin. Astra lay near the door, her body no longer rigid with pain, her amber eye alert but calm. Lumen burst into view, skidding to a stop in front of her boots, tail thumping wildly before he remembered himself and sat, trying very hard to appear dignified. "They've chosen you," Eleanor said, a small smile breaking through the lines of her face. Rowan shrugged, but his gaze rested on Astra. She met it without hesitation. "I can make it official," Eleanor said, "if you want." Rowan did not answer at once. The weight of the words settled into him. Official, paperwork, decisions. He had carried heavier choices in other years, in other uniforms, but this one reached somewhere those never had. Astra rose slowly and stepped to his side. Lumen pressed against his leg, as if the shape of him had already decided. "Do it," Rowan said. The paperwork took minutes. The change took a lifetime. By April, the creek behind the cabin had swollen with snowmelt, singing its way down the mountain. Birds returned in cautious numbers, testing the branches, their songs thin but persistent. The forest softened, as though winter itself had been persuaded to forgive. Rowan began repairing the fence that had fallen into disuse years before. He stacked fresh wood, replaced the shattered window with a new pane, scrubbed the last of the old bloodstains from the porch boards until no memory of that night remained, but the ones he carried. Astra walked the perimeter with him each evening, her stride steady, her head level, her presence neither clingy nor distant. She stayed close, not from fear, but from shared purpose. Lumen ran ahead, then doubled back, learning that leading did not mean leaving. In town, the feed store voices no longer dropped when Rowan entered. Some nodded now. One woman with tired eyes thanked him once, quickly, as if gratitude were a fragile thing that might shatter if examined too closely. Rowan did not linger. At dusk, he returned to the cabin, the dogs flanking him like shadows. One night, as the wind found the eaves and tested them, Rowan sat at the table cleaning a tool out of habit. The work was unnecessary, but his hands remembered what his mind did not always trust. He noticed then that the sound in the room had changed. Not silence, breathing. Slow, steady, close. Astra lay near the door, guarding without display. Lumen slept near the hearth, twitching in dreams, paws paddling at invisible paths. Rowan leaned back in his chair and closed his eyes. The images that once came, rope, blood, cold light, did not disappear, but they loosened their grip. He could breathe through them now. When Astra rose to check the door, he rested his hand on her shoulder, feeling the solid reassurance of muscle and bone beneath fur. Morning came with light slanting across the floor. 3 shadows stretched long across the clearing, moving together without hurry. The puppy took point, stopping often to look back. The mother followed, untroubled. The man walked between them, boots worn, stride even. Rowan Hale did not become a hero. He did not take interviews or stand for photographs. He repaired the fence. He stacked the wood. He walked the forest as he always had. But the purpose that had gone quiet inside him, dulled by years of standing down, found a new shape. Not loud, not grand. Durable. On the edge of the clearing, Lumen paused and sat, waiting. Astra looked up at Rowan, eyes amber and calm, trusting without submission. Rowan nodded once, An old signal. They moved on. Behind them, the cabin held the warmth of lived-in hours. Ahead, the path bent into green. Three shadows merged and lengthened across the ground. No ropes, no running, just a family made by patience, stitched together by the simple act of staying. Spring did not arrive all at once. It came in fragments. A morning without frost, the creek behind the cabin running louder than it had in months, the scent of wet earth replacing the long dominance of snow. Coldmore Ridge loosened its grip on winter, the way people loosen their grip on grief. Slowly, without ceremony, afraid to believe the worst had truly passed. Rowan Hale learned the weight of ordinary days again. He woke before dawn, as he always had. But now he was not the only one listening to the forest. Astra rose with him, her movement steady, her scars pale and quiet beneath new fur. The torn edge of her ear had healed into a gentle curve, a permanent reminder of a chapter the mountain would never forget. She was 5, maybe 6, he guessed now, her body broad through the shoulders, her gait powerful but calm. There was no fear left in the way she carried herself, only watchfulness, the kind that protected without asking for thanks. Lumen changed almost every morning. He was all legs now, all clumsy motion and sudden bursts of energy. His black coat deepened, the tan brightened along his face and chest, and his ears, once unsure of the sky, finally chose their direction, though not at the same time. One always seemed to arrive at attention a second later than the other, as if he were still learning how to listen. He was 7 months old by Rowan's count, though he looked older some days and younger the next. His confidence flickered like sunlight through trees. He chased falling leaves as if they were enemies, then retreated behind Rowan's boots when the wind startled him. He slept hard, sprawled on the hearth rug, dreaming loudly, paws moving across invisible landscapes. The cabin changed with them. There was mud by the door now, water bowls that needed filling twice a day, fur in the corners of the room that no amount of sweeping ever truly defeated. The fire no longer burned for warmth alone, but for company. The silence that once filled the space had been reshaped by breath and movement and the steady presence of life. Rowan found he did not resent the noise. He repaired what winter had broken. Fence posts went up straight again. The last cracked board on the porch was replaced. He planted 3 saplings near the creek, not because he believed he would see them tall, but because someone should begin them. Eleanor Briggs visited once more, this time without paperwork, bringing a bag of feed and an old blanket that smelled faintly of her house and something baked. "They look like they belong," she said, watching Astra circle the clearing before settling at Rowan's feet. "They do," Rowan replied. In town, the whispers had quieted. Some people still looked away. Others nodded now. The woman with tired eyes from the feed store, her name was Janice Webb, early 50s, hair always pulled back too tightly, stopped him once in the parking lot and pressed a paper bag into his hands. "For the dogs," she said, not meeting his eyes. Inside were 3 thick bones and a small tin of ointment. Rowan thanked her. She nodded and left. It was enough. One afternoon in May, a storm rolled in without warning. Not the brutal storms of winter, but the kind that carried the smell of green and the promise of change. Thunder folded itself through the mountains. Rain followed, heavy and warm. Rowan was inside stacking wood when Lumen suddenly froze. His ears lifted. His body stiffened. A sound slipped through the rain, not a knock, not a scratch, something lighter, uneven. Rowan's chest tightened. He crossed the room and opened the door. On the porch stood a small gray tabby cat, soaked, shivering, one eye crusted with something old and wrong. The cat was thin, ribs visible, its tail broken at the tip and crooked as a question mark. It did not run. It only looked up at Rowan with a stare that carried the same message he had learned too well. "I cannot do this alone." Astra stepped forward at once, placing herself between the cat and the room. She did not growl. She did not bare her teeth. She stood, alert, protective, uncertain. Lumen tilted his head, tail flicking, curiosity battling caution. Rowan crouched and spoke gently. The cat did not move. He lifted it carefully. The animal weighed almost nothing. He named her Wisp for the way she felt in his hands, like something made of breath and hope and very little else. The vet in the next county said Wisp had been surviving on luck for weeks. Infection, dehydration, an old break that had never healed right. She would live. Rowan brought her home. The first night, Wisp slept in a box near the hearth. Astra watched from the doorway. Lumen lay beside the box, guarding with a seriousness he had not yet learned to hide. Rowan sat at the table and listened to the room. Not silence, breathing, slow, steady, close. He understood then that the mountain was not finished with him. And that was all right. Summer edged closer. The saplings pushed new leaves. The creek softened its song. Fireflies appeared near the clearing in the evenings, drifting like small lanterns the world had forgotten to turn off. Rowan walked the forest with Astra and Lumen at his sides, Wisp sometimes riding his shoulder like a second thought. The town stayed where it was. The past stayed where it belonged. He did not chase what he had lost. He tended what he had found. One evening, as the sun bled gold through the trees, Rowan stopped at the edge of the clearing. Lumen ran ahead, then turned back, sat, waiting. Astra stood close, her shoulder touching Rowan's leg. Wisp's tail flicked once against his collar. Rowan smiled. The shape of ordinary days had become something worth keeping. Winter returned to Coldmore Ridge like an old promise kept. The mountains drew their white blankets close, and the forest stood in patient silence, each tree holding the cold as if guarding something sacred. Snow fell for 2 days without rest, soft and endless, until the world seemed to forget it had ever known another color. Rowan Hale noticed the change, the way he now noticed most things, not with urgency but with attention. He woke before dawn as always. The cabin was quiet but not empty. Astra lay near the door, her breathing slow and steady, the scar along her ear pale against her thick winter coat. She had grown into her strength, 5 years of muscle and memory now carried with the calm dignity of something that had survived and chosen to remain. Lumen slept by the hearth, long legs folded awkwardly, his chest rising in deep dreams, his ears standing tall even in sleep. At 10 months old, he was no longer the frightened pup from the storm, but a young German shepherd shaped by trust and winter air. Wisp had claimed the windowsill, her gray fur curled into a small circle of warmth, her once clouded eye now bright with quiet knowing. Rowan dressed and stepped outside. The cold touched his face and stayed there. The forest greeted him without sound. Snow creaked beneath his boots. The sky was pale blue, just beginning to break into morning. He stood at the edge of the clearing and breathed it in the way men do when they realize they are still alive. Behind him came 3 soft sounds. Lumen burst through the door first, skidding to a halt beside Rowan, tail high, eyes shining. Astra followed, measured and calm, placing her shoulder against Rowan's leg with the same quiet certainty she brought to everything. Wisp leapt onto his shoulder, light as memory. They moved into the trees together. The path was no path at all, only a ribbon of untouched snow winding between the pines. The cold sharpened every breath, but it no longer felt like punishment. It felt like clarity. Rowan stopped where the ridge opened to the valley and watched the sun climb over the distant peaks. Gold spilled across the snow. The world did not hurry. He knelt and rested his forehead briefly against Astra's neck, then placed his hand on Lumen's head, feeling the warmth and life beneath thick fur. Once there had been rope and blood and a frozen playground in his mind. Now there was only this. They stayed there a long moment. When they returned to the cabin, the fire was still sleeping in its ashes. Rowan stirred it back to life. The kettle sang. The day began without drama. By afternoon, the snow softened, and Eleanor Briggs arrived in her familiar state vehicle, stepping carefully onto the porch with her coat drawn tight. She looked at the clearing, the dogs, the cat, the cabin that no longer belonged to silence. "You found your place," she said. Rowan met her gaze. They did. They shared coffee at the small table near the window. Wisp curled into Eleanor's lap without asking. Lumen lay at Rowan's feet, one ear crooked slightly as he watched the falling snow. Astra kept her place near the door, guardian and anchor. You were built for storms, Eleanor said quietly. Not many people are. The hard part is learning what to do when the storm is over. Rowan looked around the room. I think I am learning. Dusk arrived early, as it always did in winter. The forest darkened. Snow began again, slower now, gentler. When Eleanor left, the cabin held its light like something earned. That night, Rowan sat at the table long after the others slept. He cleaned a tool out of habit, then stopped and listened. Breathing, slow, steady, close. For the first time in many years, the past did not demand his attention. Morning came clear and cold. 3 shadows stretched across the snow as Rowan stepped from the cabin. Lumen ran ahead and then sat, waiting. Astra walked at his side, her amber eyes calm. Wisp balanced easily on his shoulder. They followed the forest trail as the sun climbed and the snow began to glow. Rowan did not become a hero. He did not tell his story. He simply kept walking. Behind them, the cabin held the warmth of lived-in hours. Ahead, the mountain opened into light. A man, a wounded mother, a brave young shepherd, and a small gray cat moving through winter together. Not by accident, by choice. And the snow at last understood what it had been trying to protect all along. Sometimes God does not send miracles with thunder and light. Sometimes he sends them with a frightened puppy on a snowy night. Sometimes he sends them through a wounded mother dog who refuses to give up. Sometimes he sends them through a tired man who chooses to stay when it would be easier to walk away. This story reminds us that every ordinary day holds the chance to become a miracle. When you stop to help someone who cannot help themselves. When you choose patience instead of anger. When you protect the weak, even when it costs you something. You are walking in the quiet footsteps of God's love. In our daily lives, we may not face storms of snow and darkness, but we all face moments when someone near us is afraid and alone. A neighbor, a stranger, an animal, a friend, and God is always watching to see who will answer the door. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who needs hope today. Leave a comment and tell us what this story meant to you. Subscribe to this channel for more stories of faith, compassion, and second chances. May God bless you, your family, and every gentle heart watching this. If you believe in the power of love and kindness, type Amen in the comments.